Sarah Martinez had always been the type of person who did things her own way. At 25, she had already quit 3 different jobs, dropped out of college twice, and moved across the country more times than her family could count. When her older brother Jake suggested she join the Navy, Sarah laughed so hard she nearly choked on her coffee. "Me? In the military?" she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Jake, I can barely wake up for a 9-to-5 job, and you want me to march around in uniform taking orders from strangers?" But Jake wasn't joking. He had served 4 years in the Navy and knew his sister better than anyone. Beneath Sarah's carefree attitude and rebellious streak, he saw something she couldn't see herself. Raw potential and a sharp mind that just needed direction. "Look, Sarah," Jake said, leaning forward across the kitchen table in their mother's house. "Now you're smart, you're tough, and you're wasting your life jumping from one dead-end job to another. The Navy could give you purpose, skills, and a real career. Plus, they have programs that could pay for you to finish college later." Sarah stared at her brother like he had grown a second head. The idea of military life seemed completely opposite to everything she valued: freedom, flexibility, and the ability to make her own choices. The thought of someone barking orders at her all day made her skin crawl. "I don't do well with authority figures," she reminded him. "Remember when I got fired from the restaurant for arguing with the manager? Or when I walked out of that office job because my boss was micromanaging me?" Jake nodded, remembering those incidents all too well. "That's exactly why this could work for you. The military doesn't just teach you to follow orders, it teaches you to lead. It gives you structure, but it also builds confidence and self-discipline. You could surprise yourself." For weeks, Jake kept bringing up the subject. He would leave Navy brochures around the house, share stories about the interesting places he had traveled during his service, and talk about the lifelong friendships he had made with his fellow sailors. Slowly, almost against her will, Sarah found herself becoming curious. The turning point came when Sarah lost her job at a local bookstore after showing up late for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. As she sat in her childhood bedroom, looking at a stack of unpaid bills and feeling completely lost, Jake's words echoed in her mind. Maybe she did need structure. Maybe she did need someone to push her toward her potential. One evening, without telling anyone, Sarah drove to the local Navy recruitment office. The building looked intimidating with its official government seal and American flags, but she forced herself to walk through the doors. Inside, she met Petty Officer Williams, a friendly woman in her 30s who didn't match Sarah's expectations of a stern military recruiter. "I'm just looking for information," Sarah said quickly. "My brother thinks I should join, but I'm not sure it's right for me." Petty Officer Williams smiled and gestured for Sarah to sit down. "Tell me about yourself. What are you looking for in life right now?" As Sarah talked about her struggles with traditional jobs, her love of problem-solving, and her desire to do something meaningful, she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Petty Officer Williams listened without judgment and asked thoughtful questions that made Sarah think about her goals and values. "The Navy isn't for everyone," Williams said honestly. "It requires commitment, discipline, and the willingness to work as part of a team. But for people who are ready to challenge themselves and grow, it can be incredibly rewarding." They discussed different career paths within the Navy, education benefits, travel opportunities, and the various training programs available. Sarah learned that the Navy offered positions in everything from information technology to aviation maintenance, from logistics to cybersecurity. It wasn't just about sailing ships and following orders. It was about learning valuable skills and contributing to something larger than herself. After 3 visits to the recruitment office and countless conversations with Jake, Sarah made her decision. On a cold Tuesday morning in March, she signed her enlistment papers. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote her name, but she felt a mix of excitement and terror that told her she was doing something important. The weeks leading up to basic training flew by in a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and preparation. Sarah tried to get in shape by jogging around her neighborhood, but she quickly realized she was nowhere near military fitness levels. She could barely run a mile without stopping to catch her breath. Her family threw her a going-away party the night before she left for boot camp. Friends and relatives offered advice, expressed pride, and shared their own military stories. Sarah's mother cried. Her father shook her hand solemnly, and Jake gave her the longest hug of her life. "You're going to do great," he whispered in her ear. "Just remember why you're doing this, especially when things get tough." As Sarah packed her single allowed bag that night, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. She had never been good at following rules, had never enjoyed physical exercise, and had always preferred working alone rather than in groups. Everything about military life seemed designed to challenge her weaknesses rather than build on her strengths. But as she looked at herself in the mirror before bed, Sarah saw something different. For the first time in years, she had a clear goal and a path forward. She was scared, yes, but she was also more determined than she had ever been. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would either break her or transform her into someone she had never imagined she could become. The alarm clock buzzed at 4 a.m. and Sarah's new life began. She had no idea that in just a few months, her attitude toward training, authority, and personal responsibility would be completely challenged by one SEAL commander's simple order. She couldn't imagine that the rebellious young woman packing her bag that night would soon discover reserves of strength and courage she never knew existed. All she knew was that she was ready for something different, something that would push her beyond her comfort zone and force her to grow. The journey ahead would test every assumption she had about herself and what she was capable of achieving. The bus pulled into Naval Station Great Lakes at 5:30 in the morning, and Sarah's stomach dropped as she saw rows of identical buildings stretching into the distance. Everything was gray: the buildings, the sky, and even the faces of the drill instructors waiting to greet the new recruits. This was nothing like the glossy brochures she had seen at the recruitment office. "Off the bus! Move, move, move!" The voice belonged to a drill instructor whose name tag read, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. He was shorter than Sarah, but somehow seemed to fill the entire space with his presence. "You have 30 seconds to get your gear and form a line." Sarah stumbled off the bus with her single bag, her civilian clothes feeling completely out of place among the sea of confused faces around her. She had thought she was prepared for this moment, but nothing could have readied her for the overwhelming chaos and noise of those first minutes. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, medical checks, and the complete transformation from civilian to recruit. Sarah's long brown hair was cut short, her civilian clothes were packed away, and she was issued the standard Navy uniform that made her look exactly like everyone else. As she stared at herself in the mirror of the processing building, she barely recognized the person looking back. "From this moment forward, you are United States Navy recruits," Chief Rodriguez announced to the assembled group of 80 young men and women. "Your previous life, your previous habits, and your previous excuses no longer exist. You will learn to work together, think together, and succeed together. Those who cannot adapt will not make it through my program." Sarah was assigned to Division 245 and moved into a barracks bay with 39 other female recruits. The living space was cramped, with narrow beds arranged in perfect rows and footlockers positioned with military precision. Every surface was expected to be spotless, every bed made to exacting standards, and every piece of equipment stored in its designated location. The first week was a shock to Sarah's system unlike anything she had ever experienced. Reveille sounded at 5 a.m, followed by physical training, uniform inspections, classes on military history and protocol, and drill practice that seemed to go on forever. The schedule was relentless, with every minute accounted for and no time for, the casual approach to life that Sarah had always preferred. Physical training was Sarah's first major challenge. She had always been naturally slim and had never needed to worry about fitness, but Navy PT was on a completely different level. The morning runs left her gasping for air, while other recruits seemed to glide effortlessly around the track. Push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups revealed muscles she didn't know she had, and every muscle in her body ached constantly. But it was the drill practice that really got under Sarah's skin. Hour after hour, the division would march in formation, turning left and right, stopping and starting, all while maintaining perfect alignment and timing. Sarah had always been coordinated, but something about following the precise commands and moving in unison with dozens of other people felt unnatural and frustrating. "Martinez!" Chief Rodriguez's voice cut through the morning air during their third week of training. Your left foot is hitting the ground a full second after everyone else's. Are you marching to a different drummer, or are you just not paying attention? Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as 39 other recruits tried not to stare at her. Sorry, Chief, I'll do better. Sorry doesn't cut it in my Navy, Martinez. Drop and give me 20 push-ups. Now. As Sarah dropped to the asphalt and began her push-ups, she felt a familiar surge of rebellious anger. This was exactly the kind of arbitrary authority she had always hated. What did it matter if her foot hit the ground a second later than everyone else's? How did perfect marching make anyone a better sailor? But as the weeks went on, Sarah began to notice changes in herself and her fellow recruits. The scared, confused group of individuals who had arrived on that first bus was slowly transforming into something resembling a team. People who had never spoken to each other began helping their struggling bunkmates with uniform preparation. Natural athletes started coaching those who struggled with physical fitness. Quiet individuals began speaking up to contribute to group discussions. Sarah found herself caught between two worlds. Her old instinct to resist authority and do things her own way, and a growing awareness that maybe there was value in the structure and discipline she had always rejected. She began to excel in the classroom portions of training, where her quick mind and problem-solving abilities made her stand out. She mastered the technical aspects of Navy operations, communications procedures, and military law faster than most of her peers. Her bunkmate, Rebecca, was a farm girl from Iowa who had joined the Navy to see the world beyond her small hometown. Rebecca struggled with the academic portions of training but was naturally gifted at physical fitness and drill practice. The two women began studying together in the evenings, with Sarah helping Rebecca understand complex procedures while Rebecca coached Sarah on proper marching technique and exercise form. You know, Rebecca said one evening as they polished their boots together, when I first met you, I thought you were going to wash out in the first week. You had this attitude like nothing here mattered to you. Sarah looked up from her boots, surprised by the observation. What do you mean? You always looked like you were just going through the motions, like you were too good for all this military stuff. But lately you've been different. You actually seem to care about doing well. The comment stuck with Sarah as she lay in her narrow bunk that night, listening to the quiet breathing of 39 other women. Was Rebecca right? Had she been going through the motions without really committing to the process? She thought about her brother Jake's words about finding purpose and direction, and wondered if she was still fighting against the very thing that might help her grow. The fourth week of training brought their first major test, a comprehensive examination covering everything they had learned about Navy procedures, military law, and technical operations. Sarah studied harder than she had ever studied for anything in her life, but as she sat down to take the test, she felt confident in her preparation. The results were posted 2 days later, and Sarah was shocked to see her name at the top of the list. She had scored higher than any other recruit in her division, and Chief Rodriguez actually offered her a rare smile of approval when he handed her the test results. Outstanding work, Martinez, he said. This is the kind of performance I expect from a future Navy leader. The praise felt different from any compliment Sarah had received in her civilian life. It wasn't just about being naturally smart or talented. It was recognition for her hard work, dedication, and commitment to excellence. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, Sarah felt like she might actually belong here. But even as she celebrated this academic success, Sarah continued to struggle with the physical and disciplinary aspects of training. She still found herself questioning the value of some exercises, still felt frustrated by the rigid structure, and still occasionally clashed with the drill instructors when their demands seemed arbitrary or pointless. She had no way of knowing that her real test was still ahead of her, and that everything she thought she knew about commitment and sacrifice was about to be challenged by an encounter with one of the Navy's most elite warriors. By the 6th week of basic training, Sarah had developed a reputation among her fellow recruits as someone who was brilliant in the classroom, but unpredictable when it came to following orders. Her test scores remained at the top of the division, and instructors frequently used her written work as examples for other recruits. However, her attendance at certain training exercises had become increasingly sporadic. It started with small things that seemed insignificant at the time. During the 5th week, when Division 245 was scheduled for an early morning swimming qualification, Sarah complained of stomach problems and was excused to see the medical officer. The medical check revealed nothing serious, but by the time she was cleared to return to training, the swimming session was over. 3 days later, during a particularly demanding physical training session that focused on combat readiness drills, Sarah reported to sick call again, this time claiming severe headaches. Once again, the medical examination found nothing wrong, but she missed the entire afternoon of training. Rebecca, her bunkmate, began to notice the pattern first. "Sarah, are you actually getting sick, or are you trying to avoid certain types of training?" she asked quietly one evening as they prepared their uniforms for the next day. Sarah felt defensive immediately. "What's that supposed to mean? You think I'm faking being sick?" "I don't know what to think," Rebecca replied honestly. "But I've noticed you never seem to get sick during classroom time or written exams. It's always during the physical stuff, or the practical exercises." The observation hit closer to home than Sarah wanted to admit. She had been telling herself that her various ailments were real, that she was simply more sensitive to physical stress than other people, but deep down, she knew Rebecca was right. She was finding ways to avoid the parts of training that challenged her most, the parts that made her feel inadequate or uncomfortable. The truth was that Sarah had discovered she could maintain her high academic standing while selectively avoiding the training components she disliked. The medical staff couldn't prove she wasn't experiencing the symptoms she reported, and her stellar classroom performance made it seem unlikely that she was intentionally trying to undermine her own training. Chief Rodriguez had begun to notice the pattern as well, but Sarah's exceptional test scores and leadership potential in academic settings made him hesitant to come down too hard on her. She was clearly one of the smartest recruits he had seen in years, and her written work on military strategy and procedures was graduate-level quality. He found himself hoping that her medical issues would resolve themselves as she adapted to the physical demands of military life. The 7th week brought advanced training exercises designed to simulate real-world scenarios that sailors might encounter during deployment. These exercises combined classroom knowledge with practical skills, teamwork, and physical endurance. Sarah approached the week with a mixture of excitement and dread, excited about the intellectual challenges, but worried about the physical components. Monday's exercise involved a simulated emergency response scenario where recruits had to work in teams to respond to various crisis situations. Sarah excelled during the planning and strategy portions, quickly identifying the most efficient approaches and demonstrating impressive knowledge of emergency procedures. However, when the exercise moved to the physical implementation phase, which required crawling through tight spaces and carrying heavy equipment, Sarah developed sudden shortness of breath and had to be excused. Tuesday's training focused on basic seamanship skills, including rope work, equipment maintenance, and deck operations. Sarah mastered the theoretical aspects quickly, impressing instructors with her understanding of maritime safety protocols and equipment specifications. But when the practical portion began, requiring recruits to practice these skills under time, pressure, and physical strain, Sarah complained of dizziness and was sent to medical. By Wednesday, even her fellow recruits were beginning to whisper among themselves. Some admired her apparent ability to avoid the most demanding physical challenges while maintaining her academic excellence. Others, particularly those who struggled with classroom work but never missed physical training, began to resent what appeared to be preferential treatment. "It's not fair," complained Jessica, a recruit from Texas who had failed 2 written exams but never missed a single training session. "Some of us show up for everything, even when we're really struggling, but Martinez gets to pick and choose what she wants to participate in." The tension in Division 245 was becoming noticeable to the instructors. Group cohesion, which had been building steadily over the previous weeks, began to fracture as recruits questioned whether everyone was being held to the same standards. The sense of shared sacrifice and mutual support that is essential to military unit effectiveness was being undermined by the perception that some people were getting special treatment. Chief Rodriguez found himself in a difficult position. Sarah's academic performance was genuinely outstanding, and her medical complaints couldn't be definitively proven false. At the same time, he could see the negative impact her absences were having on unit morale and the resentment building among other recruits. Thursday's training was designed to be the most challenging yet, a comprehensive field exercise that would test everything the recruits had learned over the previous 7 weeks. Teams of 8 recruits would be given a complex scenario, requiring them to use navigation skills, communication procedures, emergency response protocols, and physical endurance to complete their mission. Sarah woke up that morning feeling genuinely nervous about the exercise. She had missed so many practical training sessions that she wasn't confident in her ability to perform the physical tasks required. Her academic knowledge was solid, but she knew that knowing something in theory and being able to execute it under pressure were two very different things. As Division 245 assembled for the morning briefing, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that she had learned to recognize as anxiety about physical performance. She began to consider what medical complaint might excuse her from the day's activities. Perhaps she could claim that the headaches were returning, or that she was experiencing stomach problems again. But as she looked around at her fellow recruits, people who had become her friends and teammates over the past 7 weeks, Sarah saw something that made her pause. She saw Rebecca, who had struggled with every written exam but never complained or sought excuses. She saw Jessica, who was clearly nervous about the day's challenges, but was checking her equipment with determined focus. She saw 38 other young men and women who had committed fully to this experience, who showed up for everything regardless of their fears or inadequacies. For the first time since beginning basic training, Sarah felt genuinely ashamed of her behavior. She realized that while she had been congratulating herself on her intelligence and academic success, she had been failing at something much more fundamental, the basic courage and commitment that military service demanded. As Chief Rodriguez began explaining the day's exercise, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of looking for an excuse to avoid the challenge, she would participate fully, regardless of how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. She had no way of knowing that this decision would put her directly in the path of a SEAL commander, whose simple order would change her entire perspective on what it meant to serve others before herself. The morning sun was rising over the training grounds, and Sarah Martinez was about to discover what she was really made of. As Team Charlie approached the final checkpoint, exhausted but determined after 7 grueling hours in the field, Sarah noticed something different about the setup ahead. Instead of the usual training instructors, a single figure in navy dress, Blue stood waiting beside the checkpoint markers. Even from a distance, there was something about his posture and presence that commanded immediate attention. Commander Jake Sullivan was not supposed to be at Naval Station Great Lakes that day. The Navy SEAL had just returned from a classified deployment overseas and was scheduled for 30 days of leave before reporting to his new assignment at Naval Special Warfare Command. But a personal request from an old friend, Chief Rodriguez, had brought him to observe this particular training exercise. Rodriguez called me because he's got a recruit with exceptional potential who's been struggling with commitment issues, Sullivan had explained to the base commander earlier that morning. Sometimes it takes a different perspective to help someone see what they're really capable of. Commander Sullivan stood 6 feet tall with graying hair at his temples and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in challenging environments around the world. His uniform displayed ribbons and decorations that most sailors would never earn: Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, and the distinctive trident pin that marked him as one of the Navy's most elite warriors. But what struck people most about Commander Sullivan wasn't his decorations or his reputation. It was the calm intensity in his eyes, the sense that he could see right through any pretense or excuse. As Team Charlie came within earshot of the checkpoint, Sarah could see that this was no ordinary instructor. The way he carried himself, the confidence in his stance, and the respect shown by every other military person in the area made it clear that they were in the presence of someone truly exceptional. "Team Charlie, halt!" Commander Sullivan's voice carried easily across the training area without him needing to raise it. There was something in his tone that made 8 exhausted recruits immediately stand straighter and focus completely on his words. "I'm not giving this to you, Martinez," Commander Sullivan said. holding up the trident pin so she could see it clearly. "But I want you to understand what it represents. This pin is earned by people who never quit, who never look for excuses, who show up for their teammates no matter how difficult the situation becomes. Every SEAL who wears this has failed at something, has been afraid of something, has wanted to quit at some point. The difference is that they kept showing up." Sarah stared at the pin, understanding for the first time that her academic achievements, while valuable, were only part of what the Navy was trying to teach her. The real lesson was about character, about the kind of person she chose to be when no one was watching and when everything was difficult. "Sir, I have a question," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. Commander Sullivan nodded for her to continue. "How do I know if I'm really changing or if I'm just telling myself what I want to hear? How do I know if I have what it takes to be the kind of sailor my teammates deserve?" The question seemed to please Commander Sullivan, and for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled slightly. "You know because you stop asking that question and start proving it. One training session at a time, one challenge at a time, one moment of choosing service over self-interest at a time." He looked around at all 8 members of Team Charlie, who had completed one of the most challenging exercises in their basic training curriculum. "All of you have demonstrated something important today. You've shown that you can work together, that you can push beyond your individual limitations, and that you can accomplish things as a team that none of you could achieve alone. Don't lose that understanding when you graduate and move on to your permanent assignments." Commander Sullivan returned the trident pin to his pocket, but before he dismissed the team, he had one final message for Sarah. "Martinez, I'll be checking on your progress. Chief Rodriguez will send me reports on your attendance and performance for the remainder of your training. I expect those reports to show that you've understood not just my order, but the principle behind it." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. And this time her voice carried a conviction that surprised everyone who heard it, including herself. As Team Charlie was dismissed and began the long walk back to base camp, Sarah found herself walking alongside Rebecca, who had been unusually quiet during the entire encounter with Commander Sullivan. "That was intense," Rebecca said finally. "I've never seen anything like that. A Navy SEAL commander taking personal interest in a basic training recruit." Sarah nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "I think he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Or maybe he saw something I was refusing to see." "What do you mean?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I think I've been so focused on protecting myself from failure that I forgot the whole point is to become someone worth trusting. Today, when we were crossing that stream and working together on those challenges, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself for the first time since I got here." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus, their team leader, who jogged up beside them. "Sarah, I wanted to tell you. Today was the first time I felt like we had a complete team. Your ideas at Checkpoint 2 saved us at least an hour, and the way you pushed through when you were obviously exhausted inspired all of us to dig deeper." As the 3 recruits continued walking through the gathering darkness, Sarah realized that Commander Sullivan's order had already begun changing her perspective. Instead of looking for ways to avoid the next challenge, she found herself looking forward to opportunities to prove that she could be counted on. The final 2 weeks of basic training would test her commitment to that order in ways she couldn't yet imagine. There would be moments when her old instincts would resurface, when the temptation to take the easy way out would be almost overwhelming. But she would remember the look in Commander Sullivan's eyes, the trust of her teammates, and the understanding that real strength came not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with courage and integrity. As Team Charlie finally reached base camp and began the process of cleaning equipment and preparing for the next day's training, Sarah Martinez was no longer the same person who had arrived at Naval Station Great Lakes 8 weeks earlier. She was becoming someone her brother Jake would be proud of, someone her teammates could count on, and most importantly, someone she could respect when she looked in the mirror. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid by a simple order from a SEAL commander who understood that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the most basic commitments. "I'm Commander Sullivan. I've been observing your progress throughout today's exercise, and I want to discuss what I've seen with one member of your team." His eyes found Sarah immediately, as if he had been studying her specifically. "Martinez, step forward." Sarah felt her heart rate spike as she moved 2 steps ahead of her teammates. She had no idea why she was being singled out, but the commander's scrutiny made her acutely aware of every shortcoming, every compromise, every moment over the past 8 weeks when she had chosen the easy path over the challenging one. "Martinez, your teammates tell me you scored at the top of your division in academic performance. They also tell me you've missed more practical training sessions than any other recruit in recent memory. What do you think those 2 facts say about you as a future sailor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the eyes of her 7 teammates on her, could sense the weight of a moment that would define not just her own future, but her relationship with the people who had come to depend on her. For 8 weeks, Sarah had been crafting careful excuses, finding sophisticated ways to avoid confronting her own limitations. But standing in front of Commander Sullivan, she found that all her usual deflections and justifications seemed hollow and meaningless. "Sir, Sarah began, then stopped. The truth was more complicated than any excuse she could offer. "Sir, I've been afraid. Afraid of failing at things that don't come naturally to me. Afraid of looking weak in front of people I respect. So I found ways to avoid the things that scared me most." Commander Sullivan nodded slowly, and Sarah was surprised to see not judgment in his eyes, but understanding. "Fear is not a weakness, Martinez. Every warrior I've ever served with has felt fear. The difference between a recruit and a sailor, between a civilian and a warrior, is what you do when that fear tries to control your decisions." He paused, looking not just at Sarah, but at all 8 members of Team Charlie. "Today I watched your team cross a dangerous stream. I watched you solve complex problems under pressure. I watched you push yourselves beyond what you thought possible. Martinez, do you know what I observed about your performance today compared to your previous 8 weeks of training?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Today, you stopped trying to protect yourself from failure and started trying to contribute to your team's success. Today, you discovered that your real strength isn't avoiding challenges. It's facing them alongside people who believe in you and whom you refuse to let down." Commander Sullivan nodded slowly, and Sarah was surprised to see not judgment in his eyes, but understanding. "Fear is not a weakness, Martinez. Every warrior I've ever served with has felt fear. The difference between a recruit and a sailor, between a civilian and a warrior, is what you do when that fear tries to control your decisions." He paused, looking not just at Sarah, but at all 8 members of Team Charlie. "Today, I watched your team cross a dangerous stream. I watched you solve complex problems under pressure. I watched you push yourselves beyond what you thought possible. Martinez, do you know what I observed about your performance today compared to your previous 8 weeks of training?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. "Today, you stopped trying to protect yourself from failure and started trying to contribute to your team's success. Today, you discovered that your real strength isn't avoiding challenges. It's facing them alongside people who believe in you and whom you refuse to let down." Commander Sullivan stepped closer, and his voice took on a tone that was both compassionate and absolutely serious. "I have one order for you, Martinez, and I want you to understand that this order comes not from my rank, but from my experience with hundreds of sailors who have faced the same choice you're facing right now." Sarah straightened to attention, sensing that whatever came next would be the most important words she had heard since joining the Navy. "My order is this. Never skip another training drill. Not because you're sick, not because you're afraid, not because you think you already know the material. Show up for everything, give your best effort to everything, and trust that your teammates will do the same for you. Can you follow that order?" The simplicity of the command made it both easier and harder to accept. There were no complex conditions, no exceptions for special circumstances, no room for the kind of creative interpretations that Sarah had been using to avoid challenges, just a straightforward requirement to be present, engaged, and committed. "Sir, I understand the order," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than she had expected. "I can and will follow it." But Commander Sullivan wasn't finished. Martinez, I want you to understand why this order matters. Not just for you, but for every person who will serve alongside you in the fleet. When you skip training, when you avoid challenges, when you look for the easy way out, you're not just cheating yourself. You're failing to develop the skills and the mindset that your future shipmates will depend on in real emergencies. He gestured toward the rest of Team Charlie, who were listening with rapt attention. These recruits trusted you today. They counted on you to carry your share of the load, to contribute your abilities to their success, to be there when things got difficult. And you came through for them. That's what being a sailor means. Being someone others can count on, especially when the stakes are highest. Commander Sullivan reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small item that made several of the recruits gasp with recognition. It was a Navy SEAL Trident pin, not to be worn but as a symbol of what was possible for someone willing to commit completely to excellence in service. The final 2 weeks of basic training tested Sarah's commitment to Commander Sullivan's order in ways that would have broken the old version of herself. Every morning brought new challenges designed to push the recruits to their absolute limits before graduation. Advanced combat training, emergency response scenarios, leadership evaluations, and comprehensive physical fitness tests filled every hour of every day. Sarah's alarm went off at 4:30 each morning, 30 minutes before the official reveille, because she had discovered that those extra 30 minutes of preparation made the difference between feeling ready for the day and feeling like she was constantly scrambling to catch up. Her bunkmates had initially teased her about the early wake-up time, but several had begun following her example when they saw how much more confident and prepared she seemed. The first major test of her new commitment came during Week 9's combat readiness training. The exercise simulated a shipboard emergency where recruits had to respond to multiple crisis scenarios while wearing full protective gear in confined spaces. The training was claustrophobic, physically demanding, and designed to trigger exactly the kind of anxiety that had previously sent Sarah to the medical bay. As Division 245 suited up in heavy protective equipment and prepared to enter the training facility, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest and the voice in her head, suggesting that she might be coming down with something that would justify missing this particular exercise. But instead of listening to that voice, Sarah remembered Commander Sullivan's words about showing up for her teammates. She looked around at the 39 other members of her division, people who had become her family over the past 9 weeks, and realized that her presence wasn't just about her own development. These people were counting on her to be there, to contribute her abilities, and to share in whatever challenges lay ahead. The combat training was every bit as difficult as Sarah had feared. The protective gear was heavy and restrictive. The simulated emergency scenarios were chaotic and stressful, and the physical demands pushed everyone to their limits. But as Sarah worked alongside her teammates, coordinating responses and solving problems under extreme pressure, she discovered something remarkable. She was not only surviving the challenge, she was excelling at it. Her academic knowledge of emergency procedures combined with her newfound commitment to physical preparation made her an invaluable team member. When Jessica struggled with a complex technical procedure, Sarah was there to guide her through it. When Marcus became disoriented in the smoke-filled training compartment, Sarah helped him navigate to safety. When the entire team faced a scenario that seemed impossible to solve, Sarah's analytical mind found the creative solution that allowed them to succeed. For the first time since joining the Navy, Sarah felt the complete integration of her intellectual abilities and her physical courage. She wasn't just smart or just tough. She was becoming a complete sailor who could be counted on in any situation. The week continued with increasingly demanding challenges. Advanced seamanship training that required working at heights while managing complex equipment. Leadership exercises where each recruit had to take command of their peers under stressful conditions. Physical fitness tests that pushed everyone beyond their previous limitations. Sarah approached each challenge with the same commitment she had made to Commander Sullivan. She showed up early, prepared thoroughly, and gave her maximum effort regardless of how difficult or uncomfortable the situation became. When she struggled with something, she asked for help instead of looking for excuses. When she excelled at something, she used her knowledge to help teammates who were struggling. The change in Sarah's approach had a ripple effect throughout Division 245. Her example of consistent attendance and effort inspired other recruits to push themselves harder. Her willingness to help teammates created a culture of mutual support that made the entire division stronger. Chief Rodriguez noticed the transformation and began using Sarah as an example of what was possible when someone committed fully to their own development. "Martinez has shown all of you what it means to overcome your limitations," he told the division during a particularly challenging week. 9 weeks ago, she was looking for excuses to avoid anything that made her uncomfortable. Now she's the first person to volunteer for the most difficult assignments. That transformation didn't happen because she suddenly became a different person. It happened because she decided to become the best version of herself. Week 10 brought the final comprehensive examinations that would determine who graduated and who would need additional training. The academic portion was something Sarah had always excelled at, but now it was combined with practical demonstrations of every skill they had learned during their 10 weeks at boot camp. The practical examinations were designed to test not just individual competency, but the ability to work effectively as part of a team under pressure. Recruits were evaluated on their technical skills, their physical performance, their leadership, abilities, and their commitment to the group's success. Sarah found herself selected as team leader for one of the most challenging scenarios, a simulated shipboard fire that required coordinating multiple response teams, managing casualties, and maintaining communication with command authorities while dealing with smoke, heat, and time pressure. As she stood before her team and began issuing orders, Sarah realized how far she had come from the person who had arrived at Naval Station Great Lakes 10 weeks earlier. That person had been focused primarily on avoiding failure and protecting herself from discomfort. This person was focused on ensuring the success and safety of everyone around her. The fire suppression exercise was chaotic and demanding, but Sarah's team performed flawlessly. Her academic knowledge of emergency procedures provided the foundation for their strategy, but it was her commitment to staying present and engaged under pressure that allowed her to adapt that knowledge to the rapidly changing situation. When one team member was overcome by simulated smoke inhalation, Sarah immediately adjusted assignments to maintain operational effectiveness while ensuring proper care for the casualty. When equipment malfunctioned, she found alternative solutions that kept the mission on track. When time pressure mounted and stress levels peaked, she maintained calm, clear communication that kept everyone focused on their objectives. The exercise concluded with Sarah's team successfully containing the simulated fire, accounting for all personnel, and restoring shipboard operations. As the evaluation team debriefed their performance, Sarah heard words of praise that would have seemed impossible 10 weeks earlier. "Outstanding leadership under pressure," noted the senior instructor. "Martinez demonstrated the ability to integrate technical knowledge with practical skills while maintaining focus on team objectives. This is exactly the kind of performance we expect from our future Navy leaders." Graduation day arrived with the pomp and ceremony that marked the transformation of 80 civilians into United States Navy sailors. Family members filled the reviewing stands. Instructors offered final words of advice, and Division 245 prepared to take their place in the fleet. As Sarah stood in formation, wearing her dress blue uniform with pride, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about her brother Jake, whose encouragement had started this entire adventure. She thought about Chief Rodriguez, who had challenged her to become better than she thought possible. She thought about her teammates, who had trusted her and supported her through every difficult moment. Most of all, she thought about Commander Sullivan and the simple order that had changed everything. Never skip another training drill. That order had been about much more than attendance. It had been about commitment, about courage, about the kind of person she chose to be when things were difficult. During the graduation ceremony, Sarah was called forward to receive special recognition for her academic achievement and leadership development. As she accepted the award, she saw Commander Sullivan in the audience, having returned to witness the graduation of the recruit whose potential he had recognized. After the ceremony, Commander Sullivan approached Sarah with a smile of genuine pride. "Well done, Martinez. Chief Rodriguez tells me you haven't missed a single training session since our conversation. More importantly, He tells me you've become someone your teammates look to for leadership and inspiration. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied. Your order changed my entire perspective on what it means to serve. Commander Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. The order was simple, but following it required you to discover courage and commitment you didn't know you possessed. That's the real accomplishment. Not just graduating from boot camp, but becoming someone who can be counted on when others need you most. As Sarah prepared to leave Naval Station Great Lakes for her first permanent assignment, she carried with her not just the technical knowledge and physical skills she had developed, but a fundamental understanding of what it meant to be part of something larger than herself. The young woman who had once skipped training drills to avoid discomfort had become a sailor who would never let her teammates down, no matter how challenging the situation. She had learned that real strength came not from avoiding difficulty, but from facing it with courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to the people who depended on her. Sarah Martinez was ready to serve her country, her shipmates, and the values that Commander Sullivan's simple order had helped her discover within herself. The transformation was complete, and her real Navy career was just beginning.